I never thought the day would come when I'd be the one standing in the doorway, frozen, watching my life crumble before my eyes. But there I was, gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles turned white. Kate, my wife of 10 years, was tangled in the sheets with Tom, my best friend. They didn't even notice me at first. The sounds of their betrayal echoed through our home, the home we built together. The shock hit me like a freight train, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This was the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had trusted with everything. And this was my best friend, the guy who stood by me through thick and thin. The betrayal was too much to process. When they finally saw me, Kate's eyes widened in shock, while Tom just looked away, shame etched on his face. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling, but all I could do was stand there, numb. Without a word, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. The sound echoed in the silent hallway, and it was at that moment I realized everything had changed. The life I thought I knew was a lie, and there was no going back. The next morning, Kate confronted me. I hadn't slept, I couldn't. Her voice was cold and distant, as if the woman who once loved me was long gone. She didn't apologize, didn't even try to explain herself. Instead, she demanded a divorce. "I'm leaving you, John," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. "I don't love you anymore. I haven't for a long time. I want the house, and I'm taking half of everything. It's the least I deserve." Her words cut deep. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. But there was something else in her eyes, greed. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to strip me of everything I had worked for. My mind raced as I realized she had planned this for a long time. She wanted it all, and she was willing to destroy me to get it. But I wasn't going to let that happen. She thought she had me cornered, but she underestimated me. If she wanted a fight, I was more than ready to give her one. I left the house without saying another word, heading straight to my lawyer's office. I needed to protect myself, to make sure she didn't take everything. My lawyer, Steve, was shocked when I told him what had happened. But he was also determined. Together, we began to prepare for the battle ahead. I wasn't just fighting for my possessions. I was fighting for my dignity and my life. Kate had chosen her side, and now it was time for me to choose mine. The days following Kate's declaration of war were a blur. I had thought I knew the woman I married, but the more I dug into her recent behavior, the more I realized how blind I had been. Steve, my lawyer, started his investigation immediately. He uncovered things that left me reeling. Kate wasn't just planning to divorce me, she had been setting the stage for months, maybe even years. She had been siphoning money from our joint accounts into a secret fund, one I had no idea existed. The woman who once claimed to love me had been plotting my downfall all along. It was Steve who suggested we bring in a private investigator. "If she's been hiding money, John, there's no telling what else she's been up to. We need to know everything," he said, his voice firm. I agreed, though part of me dreaded what we might find. The PI, a no-nonsense guy named Frank, was on the case within hours. He was thorough, and it didn't take long for him to dig up the dirt I needed. The reports he brought back were damning. Kate had been meeting with Tom for over a year, well before I ever suspected anything. And it wasn't just him, there were others. She had been living a double life, using our money to fund her secret escapades. The betrayal stung even more knowing that she had used what was ours to finance her infidelity. Armed with this new information, I knew the direction my next steps had to take. Kate thought she had everything under control, but she didn't realize the tide had already started to turn against her. My anger transformed into cold determination. I wasn't going to be her victim any longer. I played my role perfectly. Whenever Kate and I communicated, I remained calm, almost compliant. I let her believe that I was defeated, that I would agree to her terms without a fight. It was exactly what she wanted to see, a husband too broken to resist, ready to hand over everything she demanded. The reality was far different. Behind the scenes, Steve and I worked tirelessly. The evidence Frank had collected gave us the upper hand. We compiled a dossier of Kate's activities, every hidden transaction, every secret meeting. It painted a picture of a woman motivated by greed, someone who had planned to destroy her husband for her own gain. But we needed more than just evidence of her infidelity and financial deceit. We needed a strategy that would ensure she didn't just lose in court, but that she lost everything she had fought so hard to take from me. Steve suggested a counterclaim for full custody of our children and the majority of our assets. Kate would be left with nothing but the consequences of her actions. When the day came to present our case, I could see the surprise on Kate's face. She hadn't expected me to fight back, especially not with the arsenal I had brought to the table. The courtroom was tense. Every word spoken felt like a blow in a battle that had no clear end. But I stayed calm, confident in the evidence we had gathered. Kate's lies unraveled before her eyes. Every transaction she had tried to hide, every secret meeting, was laid bare. The judge listened intently as Steve presented our case, each point more damning than the last. Kate's confidence began to wane, and I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized how thoroughly she had been outmaneuvered. She thought she could take everything from me, but now, she was the one who stood to lose it all. My silence had been my greatest weapon, and now it was too late for her to recover. The courtroom felt colder as the trial dragged on. Each day, Kate's arrogance chipped away, revealing the fear she tried so hard to mask. She came to court dressed in her best, but no amount of designer clothing could hide the desperation in her eyes. The evidence we presented was overwhelming. Steve meticulously laid out the timeline of her betrayal, how she began siphoning money, meeting with Tom in secret, and setting the stage for our eventual divorce. With each new piece of evidence, Kate's carefully constructed facade crumbled. She tried to lie her way out, but the judge wasn't fooled. It was Frank's testimony that sealed her fate. The private investigator presented photographic evidence of her meetings with Tom and a few other men she had entertained over the years. Frank also detailed how she used the stolen money to fund lavish trips and expensive gifts for herself and her lovers. Every secret she had worked so hard to keep hidden was now exposed. Kate's lawyer tried to argue that she was entitled to the assets she demanded, but Steve countered with precision, showing how she had systematically drained our finances and jeopardized our family's stability. The judge listened intently, and I could see the disapproval in his eyes as he absorbed the full scope of Kate's actions. By the time we rested our case, it was clear who had the upper hand. Kate had gone from confident to cornered. Her bravado replaced by the realization that she had overplayed her hand. She had wanted to take everything from me, but now she was on the brink of losing it all. The final days of the trial were a whirlwind. Kate was visibly shaken, her confidence shattered. She had come into this battle thinking she could manipulate her way to victory, but now she was scrambling, desperate to salvage whatever she could. On the day of the final hearing, the courtroom was packed. News of the case had spread, and everyone wanted to see how it would end. Kate's friends, who once stood by her side, were nowhere to be seen. Even Tom had stopped showing up. She was alone, facing the consequences of her actions. The judge took his time before delivering the verdict, reviewing all the evidence and testimonies. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. When he finally spoke, his words were deliberate, each one a blow to Kate's hopes. In light of the evidence presented, it is clear that the defendant engaged in a prolonged and deliberate campaign of financial and emotional deception. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. John Evans. Full custody of the children is awarded to Mr. Evans, and the defendant is ordered to forfeit her claims to the marital assets, with the exception of her personal belongings. Kate's face went pale. She tried to protest, to argue that the ruling was unfair, but the judge cut her off. Mrs. Evans, your actions have shown a complete disregard for the well-being of your family. The court's decision is final. As the gavel came down, a sense of relief washed over me. It was over. Kate had lost everything she had tried to take from me. The house, the money, the children, everything was now mine. She had pushed too hard, and in the end, she was the one left with nothing. Kate left the courtroom in tears, her world crumbling around her. I watched as she walked out, knowing she would never recover from this. She had destroyed our marriage and tried to ruin my life, and now she was paying the price. It wasn't just about winning, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. Kate had underestimated me, and in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now, I knew it was a road I could walk without the shadow of her betrayal hanging over me. After the verdict, life in our small town took a dramatic turn. Kate's fall from grace was swift and merciless. Word of her deceit in the court's decision spread like wildfire, and the community that once welcomed her with open arms now turned its back. She had made too many enemies with her arrogance and deceit, and now, she was paying the price. I could see it in her eyes the few times our paths crossed, at the grocery store, on the street. She looked like a ghost of her former self, the confident woman who once thought she could control everything now reduced to a shell. No longer the queen of her domain, Kate was now an outcast, shunned by the very people she once sought to impress. Tom, her lover, and my former best friend had already skipped town. Once he realized Kate had nothing left to offer, he abandoned her. It wasn't surprising, after all, he was just as self-serving as she was. Without him or her so-called friends, Kate was completely isolated, living in a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. The luxurious life she had grown accustomed to was gone, replaced by a harsh reality she never imagined for herself. As for me, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved that it was all over, that justice had been served. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her. Kate had lost everything because of her own greed and dishonesty. She had destroyed herself with the very weapons she tried to use against me. But I couldn't let pity guide me. I had to focus on rebuilding my life, for my sake and for the sake of our children. They needed stability, and I was determined to give it to them. With the dust settled, I threw myself into creating a new life for my children and me. The house, once a place of painful memories, slowly transformed into a home filled with laughter and warmth again. I redecorated, removing any trace of Kate's presence, making it a sanctuary for the three of us. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. They were resilient, stronger than I gave them credit for. I made sure to spend more time with them, ensuring they knew they were loved and that everything would be all right. We developed new routines and new traditions, and slowly, the wounds began to heal. The town, too, began to treat me differently. People who had once only seen me as Kate's husband now saw me as someone who had stood up against betrayal and won. There was a newfound respect in their eyes, and I found myself reconnecting with old friends and making new ones. I wasn't alone in this fight, and the support I received helped me move forward. Steve, my lawyer, and now a close friend, suggested I get involved in community activities, to keep myself busy and give back. It was a good idea. I joined the local charity board, started coaching my son's little league team, and even began dating again, cautiously. I was careful and wary of trusting too quickly, but I was also open to the possibility of finding happiness again. Kate, on the other hand, disappeared from our lives. She tried to contact the kids a few times, but they weren't interested. They had seen too much and been hurt too deeply. I didn't force them. It was their choice, and I respected it. Months passed, and life settled into a new normal. There were still moments of pain and flashes of anger when I remembered everything Kate had done, but they were fewer and farther between. Each day was a step toward healing, a step away from the bitterness that had once consumed me. In the end, Kate's attempts to take everything from me had backfired spectacularly. She had wanted to destroy me, but instead, she had given me the strength to rebuild, to create a life even better than the one I had before. It wasn't just about winning the court case, it was about winning back my life. And that was a victory she could never take from me. Life had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. The chaos that once engulfed my world had subsided, and the wounds left by Kate's betrayal were slowly healing. The kids were thriving, and I was starting to feel like myself again. It seemed like nothing could disturb the calm we had found. But then, one evening, just as the sun was setting, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I finally did, my heart sank. There she was, Kate, standing on the doorstep, looking nothing like the woman I once knew. She was thinner and paler, and her eyes were filled with a desperation I hadn't seen before. "John," she started, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" I stood there for a moment, torn between anger and pity. This was the woman who had tried to destroy me, yet now she was standing before me, broken. I considered slamming the door in her face, telling her to leave and never come back, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the memory of the good times we once had, or maybe it was the fact that she was still the mother of my children. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and let her in. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. She looked around the room, noticing the changes I had made since she left. It was no longer her home, and she knew it. "I made a mistake, John," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost everything, and I have no one to blame but myself." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to hear what she had to say, but I also didn't want to let my guard down. She continued, her words spilling out in a rush. "I was blinded by greed and pride. I thought I could have it all, that I was entitled to it. But I was wrong. I've lost everything, my friends, my dignity, even my children. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm asking for your forgiveness." Her words hung in the air, heavy and difficult to process. Forgiveness. It was something I had struggled with since the beginning of this ordeal. Could I really forgive her for everything she had done? Did she even deserve it? I looked at her, this woman who had caused me so much pain, and I realized that holding on to the anger and resentment wasn't hurting her anymore. It was hurting me. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it certainly didn't mean things could go back to the way they were. "I can't forget what you did, Kate," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I don't want to carry this anger anymore. I forgive you. But that doesn't change the fact that we're over. You need to find your own way now." She nodded, tears in her eyes, understanding that there was no going back. She had burned too many bridges, and now she had to face the consequences alone. Kate left that evening, and as I watched her walk away, I felt a strange sense of closure. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending nonetheless. And in that moment, I knew I was finally free. After Kate's visit, life slowly returned to normal. The encounter had been emotional, but it gave me the closure I needed to fully move on. I focused on the future, on the life I was building with my children. They were my priority, and I was determined to give them the stability and love they deserved. The days turned into weeks, and then into months. I threw myself into work, community projects, and most importantly, being a father. The kids were growing up fast, and I didn't want to miss a single moment. We went on trips, explored new hobbies, and spent countless evenings just talking about life. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, but it was good, and it was ours. I started dating again, cautiously at first. Trust didn't come easily, but I knew I couldn't let Kate's betrayal dictate the rest of my life. I met someone, Emma, a kind, understanding woman who had also been through her share of hardships. We took things slow, and over time, she became an important part of my life. She wasn't a replacement for what I lost, but a new chapter, a new beginning. Kate, on the other hand, faded into the background. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved to a different town, trying to start over. We kept minimal contact, mostly with the kids, but even that became less frequent as time passed. She was a part of my past, a chapter that had closed. Looking back, I realized how much I had changed. The man who had once been shattered by betrayal was now stronger and more resilient. I had faced the worst. And I had come out on the other side, not unscathed, but wiser. I knew now that life could be unpredictable, that people could change, and that sometimes, the only way forward was to let go of the past. In the end, I didn't just survive Kate's betrayal, I thrived. I rebuilt my life, found happiness again, and most importantly, reclaimed my sense of self. Kate had tried to take everything from me, but in doing so, she had given me the strength to fight back, to protect what mattered most. As I stood in the doorway of my home, watching the sunset with Emma by my side and the sound of the kids playing in the background, I knew that I had won. Not just the court battle, but the battle for my own happiness, my own future. Kate was gone, but I was still here, stronger than ever. As life moved forward, I thought the chapter with Kate was fully behind me. I was focused on the future, on Emma, the kids, and our growing life together. But then, one day, I received an unexpected call that threatened to drag me back into the past. It was Kate's sister, Emily. We hadn't spoken in years, not since everything went down with Kate. Her voice was strained, almost pleading. "John, I know you don't owe her anything, but Kate is in trouble. She's not doing well." Emily explained that Kate had fallen on hard times, again. After leaving town, she had drifted from place to place, unable to find stable work or housing. She had become isolated, her health deteriorating. Emily wanted to help her, but she didn't have the means. She was asking if I could step in, just this once, for the sake of the woman I once loved. I was torn. Part of me wanted to say no, to let Kate deal with the consequences of her choices. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But another part of me, the part that remembered the good times, the part that had once loved her deeply, felt a pang of guilt. Could I really turn my back on someone who was in such desperate need? I discussed it with Emma, who was understanding and supportive as always. "John, you've come so far. If helping her gives you peace of mind, then do it. But remember, you're not obligated to save her. You've done enough." With Emma's words in mind, I made the decision to reach out to Kate. I arranged a meeting at a small diner in the next town over, somewhere neutral where we could talk. When I arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted, worn down by life. The confident woman who once controlled everything was gone, replaced by someone who had been humbled by her own mistakes. "Thank you for coming, John," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet my eyes, and I could see the shame etched into every line of her face. We talked for hours, mostly about what had happened since we last saw each other. Kate was honest, more honest than I had ever known her to be. She admitted her mistakes, her regrets, and how she had lost everything because of her own actions. There was no more pretense, no more manipulation. Just a broken woman trying to find some semblance of peace. She didn't ask for much, just a little help to get back on her feet. A loan, a place to stay until she could find a job, anything to stop her downward spiral. As much as I wanted to keep my distance, I couldn't deny that she was in desperate need. But I also knew I couldn't let her back into my life fully. Not after everything that had happened. In the end, I agreed to help her find a place to stay and offered a small loan to cover her immediate needs. But I made it clear that this was the extent of what I could do. She needed to take responsibility for her own life from here on out. Kate accepted, tears in her eyes, grateful for even the smallest gesture of kindness. As I left the diner that day, I felt a sense of closure. I had done what I could, but I also knew that this was truly the end. Whatever happened to Kate from here was out of my hands. I had my own life to live, and I wasn't going to let the past drag me down any longer. Helping Kate, even in that small way, was the final step in closing that chapter of my life. After that, I felt lighter, as if a weight I didn't realize I was carrying had been lifted. I had finally let go of the anger, the resentment, and the pain. I had done what I could for her, and now it was time to fully focus on my future. With Kate out of the picture, my relationship with Emma deepened. She had been my rock through everything, understanding and supportive in a way I hadn't known before. Our bond grew stronger, and I knew I wanted to build a life with her, one rooted in trust, love, and mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, as we were out for a walk in the park with the kids, I turned to Emma and knew it was time. Without any grand gestures, I simply took her hand and asked, "Emma, will you marry me?" She smiled, her eyes lighting up with joy. "Yes, John. Yes, I will." The kids were thrilled and excited about the idea of our family becoming even more official. We started planning a small, intimate wedding, one that was about us and the life we were creating together. Rather than any spectacle, the day of the wedding was perfect. Surrounded by close friends and family, we exchanged vows under a bright blue sky, promising to love and support each other through whatever life might throw our way. It wasn't my first marriage, but it felt like the first time I was truly building something real, something lasting. As we settled into our new life together, the memories of the past faded into the background. They were still there, of course, but they no longer held any power over me. I had faced my demons, forgiven where I could, and moved forward with a clear heart. Kate eventually moved on as well. I heard through Emily that she found a job in a small town up north and was slowly piecing her life back together. We didn't stay in touch, but I wished her well from afar. I had no more bitterness, only a hope that she could find peace in her own way. As for me, I had everything I needed: a loving wife, happy children, and a future full of possibilities. The battles I had fought were behind me. And now it was time to enjoy the life I had worked so hard to rebuild. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving Kate's betrayal, it was about thriving beyond it. I had reclaimed my life, found love again, and learned that even the darkest times could lead to something beautiful. The story of Kate and me was over, but my story was just beginning. And this time, it was a story I was writing on my own terms. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm after the wedding. Emma and I were happy. The kids were thriving, and the dark days with Kate seemed like a distant memory. But just as I thought the past was firmly behind me, an unexpected twist brought it crashing back into our lives. It started with a phone call. I was at work, reviewing some documents, when my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Emily, Kate's sister, and the urgency in her voice immediately set me on edge. "John, it's Kate," she said, her voice tight with worry. "She's in the hospital." My heart skipped a beat. Despite everything, the news hit me hard. "What happened?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. Emily explained that Kate had been diagnosed with a severe illness. It was something she had ignored for too long, hoping it would go away, but now it had progressed to a critical stage. She was in the hospital, alone and scared, with no one else to turn to. Emily couldn't be there in person, so she reached out to me, the only other person who had once been close to Kate. I didn't know what to say. The woman who had caused me so much pain was now fighting for her life, and despite everything, I felt a surge of concern. I didn't love her anymore, but I didn't wish this on her either. After a long pause, I told Emily I would go see Kate. When I arrived at the hospital, I barely recognized her. The once vibrant, if manipulative, woman was now a shadow of her former self. She looked frail, her skin pale, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. But when she saw me, a flicker of something passed through her eyes: relief. Maybe, or gratitude. "John," she whispered, her voice weak. "I didn't think you'd come." I pulled up a chair beside her bed, struggling to find the right words. Emily told me what happened. "I'm here because I had to be." For a while, we just sat there, the beeping of the machines the only sound in the room. Kate broke the silence first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, John," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I'm truly sorry." The apology, though long overdue, felt sincere. I could see the regret in her eyes, the realization of how much she had lost because of her actions. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak right away. Finally, I said, "I forgave you a long time ago, Kate. But that doesn't change the past. It just means we can both move forward." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I've made so many mistakes." We talked for a while longer. About the kids, about the life we once had, and about the paths we had taken since. There was no anger left, no bitterness, just two people who had once been close, trying to make peace with the past. As I left the hospital that day, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't closure, exactly, more like acceptance. Kate's fate was out of my hands now, but I had done what I could. I had given her the forgiveness she sought, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the last remnants of the pain she had caused. The days following my visit to the hospital were a blur of emotions. Seeing Kate so vulnerable, so close to the end, stirred up memories I thought I had buried. But it also made me more grateful for the life I had now, for Emma, the kids, and the peace we had found together. Emma, as always, was a source of strength. When I told her about Kate, she simply held my hand and listened, offering her quiet support. She didn't judge or question why I had gone to see Kate. She understood that it was something I needed to do for myself. Kate's condition worsened rapidly. Emily kept me updated, and it wasn't long before the call came. Kate had passed away. She had gone peacefully, in her sleep, and though her last years had been marked by pain and regret, she had found some measure of peace in the end. I attended the small, quiet funeral. There weren't many people there, just Emily, a few distant relatives, and myself. As I stood by her grave, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and a strange sense of closure. Kate's story was over, but mine was still being written. After the funeral, I returned home to my family, more determined than ever to cherish the life we had built together. The shadows of the past had finally been laid to rest, and I was ready to fully embrace the future. Life moved on, as it always does. The kids continued to grow, filling our home with laughter and love. Emma and I grew closer with each passing day, grateful for the second chance we had found with each other. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the long road to healing. It had all led me here, to this moment of peace and contentment. Kate had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, she had only made me stronger. I had faced the darkest parts of myself, confronted the pain, and come out the other side with a deeper appreciation for the life I had now. The story of Kate and me was over, but it wasn't a story of loss, it was a story of survival. Of resilience, and of the power of forgiveness. I had found my way back to happiness, to love, and to a future that was brighter than I could have ever imagined. As I held Emma's hand and watched the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. The past was behind me, and the future was full of endless possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly at peace. Years passed, and the memories of the tumultuous time with Kate faded into the background. They became distant echoes in a life now filled with joy, stability, and love. Emma and I built a beautiful life together, raising the kids, and creating new traditions that were ours alone. Every day, I was reminded of how far I had come, of how much I had grown. One day, as we were preparing for a family gathering, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The struggles, the pain, the betrayal, they had all shaped me into the person I am today. But more importantly, they had led me to this life, this family, and this sense of peace that I had never imagined possible. As I looked around our home, filled with laughter and the smell of a home-cooked meal, I realized that I had finally found what I had been searching for all along, a true sense of belonging. This was my family, my home, and my future, and I was grateful for every moment of it. The gathering that day was special, filled with friends and family, and a sense of warmth that made me realize just how blessed I was. The kids were older now, each forging their own paths, but still deeply connected to the family we had built together. Emma was by my side, as she always was, her presence a constant source of strength and love. At some point during the evening, I found myself standing on the porch, looking out at the sunset. It reminded me of all the other sunsets I had watched over the years, each one marking the end of a day, but also the promise of a new beginning. Emma joined me, slipping her hand into mine. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching as the sky turned from orange to pink to deep purple. "Are you happy?" she asked softly, her voice filled with the quiet confidence that had drawn me to her from the beginning. I turned to her, smiling. "More than I ever thought I could be." She smiled back, resting her head on my shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "We have," I agreed, thinking back to all the challenges we had faced, the battles we had won, and the life we had created. And I wouldn't change a thing. As we stood there, watching the last light of the day fade into the night, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The past was finally where it belonged, in the past. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, they were all gone, replaced by the love and happiness I had found with Emma and the kids. I realized then that the journey wasn't just about surviving the darkest times, but about finding the strength to build something better. I had done that, and I was proud of the life I had created. As the first stars appeared in the sky, I squeezed Emma's hand, feeling her warmth, her love, and the promise of all the tomorrows we would share together. The story of Kate and me was over, but the story of my life was far from finished. I had found love again, built a family, and reclaimed my happiness. And as I stood there, under the vast, starry sky, I knew that no matter what the future held, I was ready for it. Because this time, I was in control of my own story. It was a story of hope, resilience, and above all, love. A new dawn was coming, and I was ready to embrace it, with Emma by my side and the knowledge that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger than ever before.